Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an overview of New Cold War from Vuca Simulations and designed by Andone Orive and Igor Plaza. Now this 1 to 4 player game covers the span from 1989 to 2019. In many ways it reminds me of Twilight Struggle on steroids. There's a full solo bot and it's playable by as many as 4 players. Let's jump in and take a look at this game. Let's do a little bit of an overview before we jump in and get started. This is a 1 to 4 player game. Now, a couple things about that. If you have less than 4 players, whatever player is not humanly represented must be represented by a bot. And the 4 national global powers that you're playing are United States, China, Russia, and Europe. And additionally, there's also blocks within this. So China and Russia are aligned within a red block, and then US and Europe are aligned within a blue block. However, as the game nears its end, there can only be one winner. So the competition among the different block members tends to heat up as the game draws to a close. And speaking of game length is listed as 3 hours. The historical length is much longer, 30 years, from 1989 to 2019. And there are 3 turns per decade, so each turn represents about 3 1/3 years. Now, usually I talk about unit scale. There really aren't units in here, although there are wars and coups. You're fighting for geopolitical control, and it's all event-driven. So there isn't really a tactile army force or units that you're using in this game, because it's, in essence, a game of geopolitical control. With that being said, let's do a brief overview of the mechanics that are in play here. Very much a card-driven game. We can see these 135 cards that are in front of us here representing over 100 events over the past 3 decades. And again, its essence here, you're vying for geopolitical control over countries and regions and their sub-regions. And with that in mind, there are 7 regions on the map. We'll take a look at this as we dig into closer. There's also 13 sub-regions. There is stability is modeled within the game, and that can fluctuate, so you can destabilize or try to build up the stability of a country. There are orbit countries that are within the influence of the powers that are around them. Prestige is in play here. Media relations is in play. There's a UN Security Council, vetoes, and as we mentioned earlier, wars and coups. So lots of stuff going on, and we'll take a look at that as we look at the map in terms of some of how the gameplay and how the world is structured here. Let's jump in and take a look at the documentation. 48-page rulebook here. Again, excellent layout, lots of graphic support, lots of image support as you're kind of working through these rules. And I will say, although it's 48 pages, which might seem like a hefty rule load here, 24 pages are the basic game, are the core rules to the game. Then you've got another 10 pages here are for rules when you have less than 4 players that talk about and kind of how you manage the bots and provide some flow charts for the bots. And again, if you're playing as 1 player, 3 of the geopolitical powers will be controlled by the bots. 2 players, it's going to be 2, and so on. So there's another, 8 to 10 pages here of controls for how you're going to play with less than 4 players. Then the back end here gets into a player tutorial. This is a rather extensive 4-turn player tutorial that walks you through. It's listed as a tutorial, but it's more, to me, seems like a playthrough here. And then you've got, towards the end, you've got some reference documentation here talking about the event cards, some of the bots, interpretation tables, abbreviations, and some of the list of all the different events here. I would give this game, the game listing is a 4 out of 10. I might go a touch higher, given that there seems to be a fair amount going on in terms of some of the subtleties of geopolitical control and card play. I might go to a 4.5, but 4 feels pretty good. The solitaire rating on the back of the box is an 8 out of 10. I'm not quite sure why it would be an 8 out of 10, because to me it seems like the solo bots that are in the game here are quite fleshed out. So I would give this, I mean, depends on how we play it out here too, but it seems to me it would get a 10 out of 10 and that it's a fully functional solitaire player experience here. Now, I was looking for scenarios in the game. I couldn't see any references. I was wondering maybe if there was a shorter game, like a 1 decade or a 2 decade option, but it looks like there is not. It is the full 3-hour, 3-decade experience makes up the gameplay option for this game. Let's take a look now at the cards, which are really kind of, I think, the mechanical heart of this game. in the sense that there are 135 of them. 24 of them are objective cards. The rest are these event cards. And each round and each turn, players are going to be playing these event cards for various purposes and goals and means, as would be expected in an event-driven game. Now, a couple of things that we can look at and we see here, this is a U.S. event card. It's got the U.S. flag here and the U.S. designation. And then down below, we have neutral event cards. We'll take a look at some of the other political power cards in a moment. But I think the thing that immediately strikes me as I look at these events, these bring you right up into the 21st century. Afghanistan, Iraq wars, Microsoft Empire, U.S. military bases, Gulf War, UN peacekeeping, Ebola outbreak in the Congo, cybernetic warfare. It's hard as you look at this game not to draw comparisons with it to Twilight Struggle. And one of the key differences between this game and Twilight Struggle is this game feels modern. I mean, the game listed goes up to 2019, but a number of these historical figures, events, and activities are happening in modern times. So this game has a much more modern feel to it than Twilight Struggle, which to me feels more of that classic Cold War historical element to it. Switching in now, some European events here on the top, and then some Chinese events and Russian events. We talked about Europe and US being in blue blocks, so their edges are blue. China, Russia are the red block here. And again, a very modern feel to these events. Tiananmen Square Massacre, Chechen War, Putin is in the game here. Algerian Civil War, Balkan Wars, a lot of different, a very modern feel to this game. Let's talk a little bit about some of the components of these cards too. The top left, these are the operational points, and some of these, depending upon who's playing them and how they're played, can be split. You could have a 2 or a 1, again, a 2 or a 1. We've got the event name. Some of these are unique events that are thrown away with this garbage can right here as soon as they are used. And then, as with Twilight Struggle, cards are divided up by the decade. So we can see these, all 4 of these top European events here are first decade. Down here, we've got a second decade Russian event. The rest here are first decade. So there's event cards for each of the 3 decades as you're playing through the game. Lastly, here are some of the objective cards, and these come into play over the initial 5 turns or so of the game. And there are 2 ways to win the game. Victory points if no one has been decided before the final turn, at the end of the 9th turn, victory points determine the victor depending upon geopolitical control and elements of regions controlled on the map. However, there is an automatic victory condition. There are 8 objective cards for each power. So we're looking at 2 of the 8 for each of the 4 powers here. If you fulfill 2 of your 8 objective cards, it's an automatic win for your geopolitical power. So there are ways that the game can end shorter than the full 9-turn scenario. There is a counter sheet that comes with the game, but these are all markers. So these mark some certain events. These are the veto kind of markers that we talked about. And then down here we have some variations for the subregions. Again, there are 13 subregions in the game. We'll take a closer look at these when we're looking at the map. But this is the relatively very modest set of counters in the game that are used as markers to keep control of gameplay and various status and events. We have 4 player aids, 1 for each player. So China, Russia, US, and Europe. Let's take a look at the European one here as we go through it. Basically just a lot of handy gameplay information. These are single-sided, so all of the information is on one side. Some of the information is pertinent to Europe, so your initial deployment and your European orbit countries, all 8 of them, US orbit countries, so they're floating down here. But all of the essential information that you'd want to have that you might have to dig into the rule book. These are the objective cards for the various powers that are over here on the right side. So very handy, nice thick cardstock here, as would be the case with Vuca Sim's production qualities here, and 1 for each player. More fun, the game comes with 225 of these wooden tokens to control various elements of gameplay. A significant number of these have the geopolitical flags on them. They're going to be placed on countries as you gain geopolitical control over those countries. Then another number of the other ones are used to track various game functions like media point, prestige track, the victory points, and various game markers that are on the board. So a great collection of these. Now these are all wooden tokens, and these markers are not stickers. These are burned into the tokens themselves, so no need to put on 200 marker stickers onto your tokens here. They're all ready to go. Look really nice color set here, and ready to be deployed for gameplay. Last but certainly not least, we have the 22-inch by 34-inch fully mounted map of the planet Earth. In the middle here, we can see this is where the card play takes place, and each turn is divided up really into 3 phases. There's an initial phase, and then the heart of it is the action phase, where players are going to be taking turn playing cards in a number of different ways to try to influence the geopolitical climate of the world. And then there's kind of a cleanup phase. So the sequence of play is actually quite straightforward. Now there's a number of things we're looking at on the maps here. We can see these boxes here are the 7 regions and the victory points that they are worth for each of the larger powers. We can see, of course, the countries and the regions around the map. We'll take a closer look at one of those in a moment. And then up here we have the turn track, and then down below here we have the media track and the prestige track that outline it here. Really like the design of this. I love the color. It has a very modern feel to it, which I think really, one of the things I sense as I'm looking at this game and getting a sense of the gameplay is the ability to kind of connect with world history over the last 30 years by playing this game. I think it's going to bring to the forefront a lot of events and a lot of the elements that happened on the world stage in the past 30 years. So I think as an educational tool, although it doesn't dig deeply into the events in and of themselves, it would be great conversation starters for helping people to kind of dig into the world history for the past 30 years. So I think big kudos here for its educational potential to draw people into current events. I want to highlight South America here just to kind of show a little bit of some of the depth of gameplay that's involved in this one. Here we have the regional scoring, so the victory points for each of the regional powers. Then we also have the sub-regions. So these 4 countries are connected by these orange dots. This is the Andean community, which is a sub-region. It has its own victory points. That's what you use the counters for to drop them down as they come into play. Then the southern cone down here are these 3 countries here. This one's not, Paraguay is not connected to either of them. Now we've got a number of circles going on here. Brazil here has this larger orange circle with the dots on it. So this is a regional power representing a power within South America in and of itself. And then Argentina also has this blue background with the orange dashes, as does Venezuela up here. These are geostrategic countries. Then the other ones that don't have any such markers are non-geostrategic countries. To the left of the circles here, we see these numbers. These are the stability ratings of a country, and some of them have a variety, have a red block or a blue block, depending on which country, which geopolitical power is performing an action in that area. Some of the regions are locked to different powers at the beginning of the game, and they become unlocked at turn 5 here for Europe playing in South America. So there are some subtleties to the regions too. Not every region is going to play the same way. I really like the design on this. Once you understand what all of the elements mean and how they stand for, it's immediately apparent. Very visually easy to parse a region and to figure out what each thing is worth and how it's all working together. So there we have it, new Cold War from Vuca Sims. Let me know what you think down below. If you've got any questions, happy to answer them. At some point, I hope to bring perhaps an example of play or some sort of video about gameplay to the channel. I'm not quite sure yet when that will happen, but very intrigued with this one. I'm curious too about the solo bots and how they might represent gameplay too. I think that, if the solo bots here are strong and you can get a really good solitaire experience out of this, I think there's a ton of gameplay here for the solitaire game player. And of course, I think it's, its target here is that, 4-player, 3-player audience where I think it's going to really stand out for those 4-player games when you can get a bunch of people vying for world control and be able to play it in a single sitting in an evening. Seems like a lot of fun here, a lot of good things going forward to it. Very much excited about this one.